When I died, I wasn't shocked my children didn't come. I was ashamed that I understood why. My heart stopped for 2 minutes. 5 days in a coma. Plenty of time for someone to get on a plane. Plenty of time to decide if I was worth the trouble. I have 4 children. They called the hospital. They did not come. Except her. And the worst part isn't what they did. It's what I built. I wasn't a bad man. I didn't drink away paychecks. I didn't disappear. I worked. I paid the mortgage. I kept food in the fridge and heat in the winter. That was my love language. When my wife died giving birth to our youngest, I didn't collapse. I didn't scream. I held my newborn son in one arm and signed hospital papers with the other. 3 kids were waiting at home. Someone had to be steady. So I became steady.
A lot of men did that, and never questioned it.
I worked every overtime shift I could get. Storm nights. Holiday calls. 3 in the morning climbing poles so strangers wouldn't sit in the dark. I missed my middle son's championship game. I missed my daughter's birthday dinner. But the moment that never leaves me was smaller than that. My oldest was 17. He asked if I could take a day off to visit an Air Force base with him. He'd been accepted into a youth program. He was excited. I told him no. Not because I couldn't afford it. Because I was afraid. Afraid that standing on that runway, watching jets lift into the sky, would wake up the dream I buried years ago. I told him I had work. He went alone with a friend's father. He never asked me about flying again. Years later he said, calm as ever, "Dad, you always choose the safe road." At the time, I thought he was criticizing my career. Now I think he was describing my heart. Somewhere along the way I stopped being their father and became their utility. If something broke, I fixed it. If something hurt, I told them to toughen up. We didn't hug much. We didn't talk about fear. We talked about responsibility. I thought I was raising strong men and an independent daughter. Maybe I was. But I was also teaching them not to need me. And maybe not to show up when I was weak. I met her after I fractured my leg falling off a ladder 5 years ago. Trauma doctor. Direct eyes. Slight accent. She spoke carefully, like words mattered. She looked at my chart and then at me. You tolerate pain longer than you should. I joked about electricians being stubborn. She didn't smile. I'm not talking about your leg. We started seeing each other around town. Same grocery store. Same old rock songs from the 70s. Conversations that lasted longer than planned. She had her own history of waiting. A father who left for America and didn't send for her for 10 years. A husband who left after 12 because she couldn't have children. She knew what abandonment felt like. Maybe that's why she recognized it in me. For 5 years we hovered between friendship and something braver. And I never crossed the line. Not because I didn't care. Because I was afraid my children would see it as betrayal. Afraid I'd look ridiculous at 60. Afraid of wanting something that wasn't practical. So I kept her close enough to matter, but far enough to be safe. Then came the storm. Half the grid went down. I didn't have to climb that night. There were younger guys. Faster reflexes. But I've never known how to step back. Wet boots. Old ladder. A white flash. Silence. No angels. No tunnels. Just memories. My daughter at 13 holding up a drawing I barely looked at. My middle son scanning the bleachers for my truck. My oldest standing alone on that runway. Her voice once saying quietly, "You don't have to carry everything alone." 2 minutes without a heartbeat. 5 days in a coma. My children were trying to rearrange schedules. She slept in a vinyl chair with her coat on. Argued with a resident about my medication. Held my hand like it mattered whether I stayed. When I opened my eyes, she was there. And I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not anger. Not disappointment. Clarity. I had raised capable adults. But I had never shown them how to sit beside weakness. I had never shown them that strength sometimes looks like asking for help. Lying there, tubes in my arms, I realized something harder than the fall. I had lived responsibly. I had lived reliably. But I had hidden from risk. Including the risk of loving her openly. When she leaned close and whispered, "You scared me," her voice broke just slightly. No one had said that to me in a long time. You scared me. It meant I mattered to someone not because I was useful, but because I was chosen. And for the first time in 61 years, I understood something terrifying. If I walked out of that hospital and went back to being steady, practical, safe, I would lose her. Not to another man. But to my own fear. When I died, no one came. Except her. And waking up meant I had to decide whether I would keep living like a utility, or finally risk being a man who chooses love, even if it costs him something. The hardest thing my son ever said to me wasn't shouted. It was quiet. If you have to choose, Dad, don't choose her. That's how this chapter really starts. Not in the hospital. Not in church. But in my own kitchen, with my oldest son standing across from me like we were negotiating a contract instead of talking about my life. I didn't ask him to repeat it. I heard him the first time. And what hit me wasn't anger. It was this: he believed I would choose. That I would line people up like options and decide. Let me tell you something honest. For 5 years, I'd been doing exactly that. Keeping her in a safe space. Close enough to matter. Far enough not to upset anyone. She never demanded more. Which somehow made it worse. After the hospital, she came by almost every evening for a week. Not to hover. Just to check in. One night she was washing dishes at my sink, not because I asked, just because that's who she is. And she said, without looking at me, "I don't want to be the secret good thing in your life." That landed harder than the electricity ever did. I said she wasn't a secret. She turned off the water and finally faced me. "Then why do your children look surprised when I'm here?" There it was. Not anger. Clarity. She had waited 10 years for her father to send for her. Waited 12 years for a husband to decide she was enough. She wasn't going to wait quietly again. I told my sons I cared about her. I didn't expect applause. But I didn't expect the shift either. My middle son stopped coming by. My youngest started talking about timing and respecting Mom's memory. And then that night in the kitchen, the line that stuck. "If you have to choose, don't choose her." He said it carefully. Like he was protecting something fragile. And I realized something I hadn't faced before: they weren't afraid of losing me. They were afraid of losing the version of me they understood. The steady one. The predictable one. The man who never disrupted anything. That same evening, she called. I told her the conversation didn't go well. There was silence on the other end. Then she said something that scared me. Then maybe this is where I step back. Not dramatic. Not emotional. Just resolved. And suddenly the house felt bigger than it ever had. I drove to her place the next day without calling. She was on her porch. Same porch where we'd had 100 quiet talks. I told her I wasn't asking my children for permission. She studied my face for a long moment. "Are you saying that because you mean it?" she asked, "or because you're afraid of losing me?" That question split something open. Because the truth was, it was both. I was afraid. Afraid my children would drift further. Afraid holidays would become divided. Afraid of being the man who disrupted the peace late in life. But I was more afraid of something else. Of waking up in 10 years and realizing I let fear make one more decision for me. I told her about the Air Force Base. About how I didn't go because I didn't trust myself with the dream. About how I'd been choosing safe roads since I was 30. She listened. No judgment. When I finished, she said quietly, "I don't want to be another thing you choose out of fear." That's when it hit me. Keeping her halfway wasn't neutral. It was selfish.
That's a hard thing for a man admit. I think so.
I was asking her to accept half a man so my life stayed comfortable. That night, my oldest called again. He said, "It feels like you're changing." And for the first time, I didn't apologize for it. "I am," I said. There was a long pause. Then he asked, softer this time, "Does that mean we're less important?" That question hurt. Because I knew where it came from. From years of watching me measure love by sacrifice. I told him something I should have said decades ago. You're not less important. You're grown. And I'm still a person. Silence again. Not angry silence. Processing silence. After we hung up, I sat alone in the dark kitchen. And I realized the real choice wasn't between her and my children. It was between being needed and being known. Being needed had defined me for 40 years. Being known meant risk. It meant conflict. It meant possibly disappointing people. The next Sunday, I didn't hesitate. I walked beside her into church. Not quietly. Not carefully. Public. And I saw something in her face I hadn't seen before. Relief. Not because she'd won. Because I had finally stood up. After the service, my phone buzzed. A message from my youngest, "We'll talk." Not approval. Not rejection. Just uncertainty. And as we walked to her car, she squeezed my hand briefly and said, "I won't wait forever." That wasn't pressure. That was truth. And driving home, I understood something that made my hands shake more than the ladder ever had. Choosing her might not cost me my children. But it would cost me the illusion that I could keep everyone comfortable. And for a man who built his life on keeping things steady, that felt like stepping off another ladder. This time without knowing if anyone would catch me. She didn't walk away slowly. She didn't cry. She didn't raise her voice. She just looked at me, and said, "I'm not doing this anymore." That was the moment. Not the dinner. Not the church. Not the arguments. That sentence. And I earned it. It started 3 days earlier at my youngest son's house. We were sitting around his dining table. Kids laughing in the other room. Roast cooling between us. He said, careful but firm, "Dad, it feels like you're rewriting history." I asked him what that meant. He leaned back, folded his arms. "Mom's been gone 20 years. And now suddenly you're in church, walking around town with someone. It's just hard to watch. Hard to watch." Like I was embarrassing him. Then my middle son added something that cut deeper. "We don't even know her. You kept her separate for years. And now we're supposed to accept it overnight?" That part was true. I had kept her separate. Because I didn't want conflict. Because I wanted everyone comfortable. And comfort has always been my weakness. I drove home angry. Not at them. At myself. Because they were right. I hadn't chosen her. Not publicly. Not fully. When I pulled into my driveway, her car wasn't there. Instead, There was a message on my phone. Can we talk tonight? I knew. Men our age know when something is shifting. She was sitting on my porch when I arrived. Not inside. That alone told me everything. She didn't wait for small talk. I spoke to your son at the store, she said. I nodded. He asked if I understood what I was doing to your family. She didn't sound offended. She sounded tired. I told him I wasn't doing anything. I wasn't forcing you. That word hung in the air. Forcing. Because the truth was, she never had. All these years, she had waited for me to stand up on my own. She looked straight at me. Do you love me? Simple question. I said yes. Without hesitation. Because that part was true. Then she asked the one I wasn't ready for. Are you willing to let them be angry with you? And there it was. The real cost. Not losing my children. Losing their approval. Losing the image of being the steady, dependable father who never disrupts anything. I hesitated. Just a second. But hesitation speaks. She saw it. Her shoulders dropped, just slightly. I won't spend the rest of my life competing with your fear, she said. I stepped closer. You're not competing with anything. Yes, I am, she replied softly. With the version of you that always chooses safe. Safe. I've been called responsible. Reliable. Solid. No one ever called it what it was. Fear. I told her I just needed more time. The worst sentence a man can say to a woman who's waited 5 years. She nodded slowly. Time is what you say when you hope the decision makes itself. Then she stood. Not dramatically. Not storming off. Just finished. I don't want half a life with someone who's afraid to claim it. And then she did something that hurt more than walking away. She took the small spare key to her house off my keychain. Set it on the porch railing. I won't ask you again, she said. And this time, it wasn't a boundary. It was an ending. I didn't grab her arm. I didn't plead. I stood there. Watching the only person who chose me without obligation get into her car. The engine started. The taillights disappeared. And for the first time since my wife died, I felt abandoned. Not because someone left. Because I didn't move. I went inside. Sat at the kitchen table. The same table where my son told me not to choose her. And something finally cracked. All my life I believed love was measured by sacrifice. But what I had been sacrificing lately was courage. My phone buzzed. A text from my oldest. Dad, we just don't want you making a mistake. A mistake. Loving someone who stayed when I almost died. I stared at that message for a long time. Then I saw the pattern clearly. I had taught my children stability over vulnerability. Predictability over passion. So of course they were confused. I raised them that way. But here's what hit me hardest. I was about to lose her. Not because they asked me to choose. But because I never did. I grabbed my keys. Drove to her house. Lights off. Curtains drawn. Her car gone. I knocked anyway. No answer. I called. Straight to voicemail. That's when the fear stopped being theoretical. It became real. You can live with your children being disappointed. You can survive awkward holidays. But you don't get unlimited chances with someone who's waited. I stood on her porch longer than I should admit. And I finally understood something I should have learned decades ago. Choosing nothing is still a choice. And it usually costs you everything. Driving home, I wasn't noble. I wasn't transformed. I was scared. Because for the first time, Safe had taken something from me. And I didn't know if I was already too late. The second time my heart stopped. I heard the word, flatline. Not from heaven. From a paramedic. Someone shouted it like a warning. Like something that shouldn't be happening twice to the same man. And for a split second, I thought this was fair. Fair. Because I had already lost her once. The storm came in fast that night. Wind snapping branches, rain blinding enough to make you question why you're out there at all. I didn't have to go. That's the part that matters. There were younger men on the crew. Stronger legs. Faster hands. But my house felt like a cave after she left. So when the call came, I volunteered. Not for duty. For noise. For something louder than regret. The ladder was slick. My left boot slipped once. I corrected it. I've been correcting small slips my whole life. The line should have been dead. It wasn't. There was a white flash so bright it erased sound. Then impact. Then nothing. When they told me later I'd been gone for 2 full minutes, I believed them. Because I remember the quiet. Not peaceful. Empty. I didn't see memories in slow motion this time. I felt weight. Regret has weight. I saw her porch. The spare key hitting the railing. Her taillights disappearing while I stood there like a man waiting for permission from someone who wasn't even present. And then something else surfaced. My son's voice at that dinner table. It feels like you're embarrassing yourself. He hadn't meant cruel. But that's what it was. Embarrassing. A 61-year-old man trying to fall in love. The quiet asked me a question. If this is the end, what did you actually protect? Their comfort? Your image? Or your fear? Then pain exploded through my chest and I was back. Hospital lights. Hands pressing down on my ribs. Someone saying, "Stay with us." I wanted to laugh. Stay where? In the life I almost walked away from twice? This time, when I woke up, the chair beside the bed wasn't just empty. It felt accusing. My sons were there within hours. All 3. Faces pale. Voices tight. My oldest grabbed my hand and said, "What were you thinking?" Not relief. Not gratitude. What were you thinking? I didn't answer. Because I didn't know how to explain that I wasn't climbing for duty. I was climbing to outrun loss. My middle son leaned in closer. If you keep doing reckless things, you're going to leave us. Reckless. That word stung. Because for 40 years, I was anything but reckless. And suddenly loving someone was labeled risk. My youngest finally said it straight. "Dad, she's not worth dying for." The room went still. I felt something in my chest shift, and it wasn't medical. Not worth dying for. I didn't shout. But I sat up despite the pain. "You don't get to measure her like that," I said. They looked shocked. Not at my words. At my tone. For the first time, I wasn't negotiating. I wasn't softening. I told them about the porch. About the spare key. About how I froze. Silence filled the room. My oldest finally asked. "So what are you going to do?" And there it was. No advice. No demand. Just the question I'd avoided my entire life. What are you going to do? After they left, the nurse handed me my phone. I stared at her name. My thumb hovered longer than I'd admit. This time, fear wasn't about losing approval. It was about hearing nothing on the other end. I called. Voicemail. I called again. Voicemail. I sent one message. I chose wrong. I'm choosing now. No long speech. No poetry. Just truth. An hour later, my phone buzzed. 3 words. You were late. That was it. Not cruel. Not dramatic. Final. I felt my throat close. For the first time since my wife died. I cried. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just quietly. Because this wasn't about romance. It was about pattern. I had been late my whole life. Late to dreams. Late to feelings. Late to choosing. The doctor came in later and said something that cut clean. If your heart stops like that again, we might not get you back. No drama. Just probability. And I lay there staring at the ceiling realizing something brutal. You don't get infinite chances to become who you're supposed to be. When they discharged me, my sons walked me to the truck. My oldest cleared his throat. We were scared, he said. I know, I replied. He hesitated. If you really want this, don't have to it. That was new. Not permission. Not blessing. But not resistance either. I drove straight from the hospital. Not home. To her house. Her car was there. Lights on. I stood at her door longer than I should admit. Knocked once. She opened it. And for a second, neither of us spoke. Her eyes weren't angry. They were guarded. You almost died, she said. I know. And now you're here. Yes. She didn't move aside. Not yet. Why? She asked. And this time, there was no hesitation. Because if I die again, I said, I don't want the last thing I protected to be my fear. Silence. Long. Heavy. Then she stepped back just enough to let the door stay open. Not wide. Not welcoming. Open. And I realized something. Surviving the fall wasn't the hard part. Earning back time might be. And for the first time in my life, I was ready to stand there without pretending I deserved it. I found her spare key in my pocket 3 days after I got out of the hospital. Not on the keychain. Not in the bowl by the door. In my pocket, like it had been hiding from me. I held it in my palm and realized something that made my stomach drop. For months, I'd been begging life for one more chance, and when I got it, I still didn't know what to do with it. That key wasn't a promise. It was a question. So I drove to her house with my heart acting like it was 25 again, fast, stupid, loud. I didn't rehearse a speech. I didn't plan an angle. I just knew I couldn't survive another, "You were late." When I knocked, she opened the door but didn't invite me in. Not unfriendly. Just cautious. Like a doctor reading a chart she doesn't like. "You're standing," she said. "Barely," I answered. "But I'm here." She waited. And I finally said the words I should have said years ago, simple, unpolished, true. "I'm not asking you to wait. I'm asking you to let me live in the daylight with you." That landed. I could tell. Because her eyes softened for a second, then hardened again. "Daylight costs," she said. "Are you ready to pay?"
That's where most men hesitated. It's beautiful story. Really beautiful.
That was the real hook of it. Not love. Not romance. Cost. I told her I didn't know how to prove it with words. So I'd prove it with choices. The first choice came quicker than I expected. My oldest called that night. He didn't start with, "How are you?" He started with, "Dad, the guys at the union are talking. They say you're moving too fast." I almost laughed. My heart stopped twice and people still worried about pace. "Are you coming for Sunday dinner?" he asked. "All of us." Like old times. I heard the test under the invitation. Show up and be the old version of you. Miss it and you're choosing her. I looked at my phone, then at my kitchen table. For 40 years, that table had been the center of my life. Now it felt like a courtroom. I made my decision and my voice didn't shake. I'll come, I said, but I'm not coming alone. Silence. Then, quieter, don't do that to your mother's memory. I closed my eyes. I could have argued. I could have begged. Instead I said the truth. I'm not replacing Mom. I'm refusing to die alone. He didn't answer. He just ended the call. I slept maybe an hour. Sunday came. I drove to her house early. I stood on her porch with a pie from the grocery store like some awkward peace offering. She opened the door and saw it. You don't have to, she said. I do, I told her. Not for them. For me. In the truck, neither of us talked much. The closer we got, the tighter my hands held the steering wheel. At the house, my sons were already there. My daughter too. She looked nervous, like she'd been hoping for a miracle and expecting a fight. When she stepped out of the truck, the yard went quiet. My middle son nodded stiffly. My youngest stared at the ground. My oldest didn't move. I introduced her the way you introduce something you care about. This is Elena. Not my friend. Not my doctor. Not someone I've been seeing. Just her name. Like it belonged. We sat down. Plates clinked. Small talk tried to live and kept dying. Then my oldest finally said it. So what now? You want us to pretend this is normal? Elena didn't speak. She didn't need to. This was my family. My moment. I felt my old self rising, steady, smooth, eager to calm everyone down. To make it comfortable. To be useful. And I stopped it. No, I said. I don't want you to pretend. I want you to respect it. He scoffed. Respect what? A late-life crisis? That phrase hit like a slap. And for a second, I saw the ladder again. The flash. The flat line. I saw my wife's hospital hallway. I saw Elena's spare key on my railing. I stood up. I've had crises, I said. This isn't one of them. My voice was calm, but it wasn't soft. This is me finally telling the truth. I was lonely. And I was scared. And I made all of you the reason I never lived. My daughter's eyes filled. My youngest looked up, stunned. My middle son swallowed hard. My oldest stared at me like he didn't recognize me. Good. Then he said the hardest thing he could. If you do this, you're choosing her over us. And there it was, my old trap, laid out clean. I took a breath. I'm choosing a life, I said. And I hope you're in it. But I'm done living on the edge of your approval. The room went silent in a new way. Not angry. Uneasy. Elena reached for her water glass and set it down slowly. Her hands were steady, but her eyes weren't dry. My oldest didn't apologize. He just nodded once, like a man accepting whether he can't control. After dinner, my daughter walked me to the porch. I didn't know you felt like that, she whispered. I didn't either, I told her. 2 days later, I did something I'd been avoiding for years. I sat down with a lawyer. I rewrote my will. Not to punish my children. Not to buy love. I set aside money for a local foster and adoption program, quietly, anonymously. Because Elena once told me, years ago, that if she couldn't have a child, she wanted to help the ones nobody chose. When I told her what I'd done, she didn't cry. She just covered her mouth for a moment and looked away, like she was trying not to fall apart. That's not for me, I said. That's for the part of us that kept getting left behind. That night we stood in her kitchen, making coffee, like two people learning how to be ordinary together. And I realized the ending wasn't a wedding. It wasn't fireworks. It was something smaller, and harder. It was choosing, every day, not to disappear into duty. A week later, I parked my old truck in front of her place with 2 suitcases. She opened the door. "You sure?" she asked. I looked at her, and for once I didn't look past her toward anyone else's opinion. "I'm sure," I said. "If I'm going to be remembered, I want it to be for showing up." She stepped aside. "Not halfway. All the way. And if you're wondering about my kids, no, it didn't become perfect." But a month later, my youngest called and said, awkwardly, "Tell Elena I said hi." That was his way of opening a door. The truth is, I didn't lose my family. I just stopped losing myself. When I died, no one came. Except her. So I built a life where I never have to ask who will show up again.